Lee Jin-woo, the widowed CEO, was a man of ice. His mansion was a palace, but his heart a tomb. His twin daughters, Lee Ha-eun and Lee Ha-rin, felt the absence of a mother, and no maid could fill the void. Until Kim Min-ji, a humble young woman with a gentle smile, accepted the job. Jin-woo, skeptical and distrustful, decided to test her. He feigned a business trip to observe the new maid. But upon secretly returning to his own home, what he saw through the window paralyzed him. Min-ji wasn't just taking care of his daughters. She was playing with them, laughing, hugging them as if they were her own twin daughters. The connection was so deep, so genuine, that it made them seem like a real mother and daughters. Jin-woo's cold heart, which he thought was dead, began to beat in a way he hadn't felt in years, and his attitude from that moment on would be something no one expected. Time stood still. Lee Jin-woo, the man who commanded empires with an icy gaze, was paralyzed, not by a financial setback or corporate betrayal, but by the simplest and purest sight his eyes had ever witnessed. Through the window of his own home, he saw Kim Min-ji, the maid he had hired with a mixture of skepticism and desperation, and his daughters, Ha-eun and Ha-rin. They weren't just under her care, they were living with her. Min-ji was on the living room floor, surrounded by colorful cushions and scattered toys. Ha-eun was nestled in her lap, while Ha-rin tried to stack blocks on her head, laughing uncontrollably each time they tumbled down. The sound, muffled by the glass, still reached Jin-woo like a long-forgotten melody. It was the sound of childish joy, of carefree abandon, of love. And Min-ji was at the center of it all, her face illuminated by a smile so genuine that it made Jin-woo's heart ache in a painful and strangely sweet way. Her eyes shone with a tenderness he hadn't seen since his wife had passed. He remembered the countless maids who had come and gone. Competent women, yes, but distant. They performed their duties, cared for the girls, but never dared to cross the invisible line separating duty from affection. Jin-woo, in his grief and rigidity, had even encouraged this distance. He believed that attachment would only lead to more pain when they inevitably left. But Min-ji had demolished that barrier with the lightness of a hug and the strength of a smile. What was this he felt? It wasn't anger, not the distrust he expected. It was something more complex, a tangle of emotions he couldn't name. Envy, jealousy. Yes, perhaps a little of both. He envied the ease with which Min-ji connected with his daughters, the laughter she drew from them, the intimacy that he, their father, had never truly managed to cultivate after his loss. He felt jealous of the place she seemed to have so quickly carved out in the little hearts of Ha-eun and Ha-rin. But there was something deeper, something that frightened him. It was a warmth that slowly spread through his chest, melting the ice he had cultivated for years. It was the sight of his daughters, his precious daughters, finally experiencing the joy and maternal affection he thought they would never have again. And the source of that warmth was Kim Min-ji. He stepped away from the window, not to leave, but to find a new angle, a new shadow from which he could observe unseen. He moved like a ghost in his own house, an intruder in a sanctuary he himself had created, but which now seemed to belong to someone else. He watched Min-ji read a story to the girls, her voice soft and melodious. He saw Ha-eun fall asleep on her shoulder, and Min-ji carried her to bed with a delicacy only a mother would possess. He saw her tuck in Ha-rin, who was already fast asleep, and whisper something he couldn't hear, but which seemed to be a blessing. The image of Min-ji kneeling beside his daughter's bed with an expression of pure devotion etched itself into his mind. She was the personification of the mother he had lost, the mother his daughters desperately needed. And he, Lee Jin-woo, the man who could buy anything, could not buy this. He could not create this. The tension in his body was palpable. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to go in, to confront her, to demand explanations. but what would he say? "Why are you being so good to my daughters? Why are you giving them what I cannot?" The words seemed ridiculous, pathetic. He spent hours watching until night fell and the house plunged into a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the memory of laughter and tenderness. Jinwoo did not return to his car. He did not call his assistant to cancel the business trip. Instead, he hid in his study, the darkest room in the house, and sat in his leather armchair, lost in thought. His attitude from that moment on would be something no one expected. He would not fire her. He would not reprimand her for her familiarity. Instead, Lee Jinwoo, the ice-hearted CEO, would make a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. He would not interfere. He would observe. He would learn. And perhaps, for the first time in a long time, he would allow his heart, which he thought was dead, to feel again. He would become a shadow in his own home, a silent spectator of a family dynamic he couldn't understand, but desperately wanted to preserve. The pretense of the trip would continue, but now with a very different purpose. He wanted to see how far this connection could go. He wanted to see if Minji was real. And he wanted to see if he, Lee Jinwoo, was still capable of feeling. The door to a new and dangerous emotional territory had been opened. Days dragged on, but for Lee Jinwoo, they flew by in a haze of observation and introspection. His study, once a refuge of power and control, had become his hideout, his lookout post. From there, he heard the echoes of a life he didn't know his house could have. Laughter, off-key children's songs, the soft murmur of a bedtime story, sounds that for years had been stifled by the heavy silence of loss. Minji wasn't just a maid. She was the missing melody in his family's symphony. He observed her through cracks, mirrors, and even the screen of discreetly installed security cameras, a CEO's habit that now served an unexpected purpose. Her every movement was studied, every word analyzed. He expected to find a flaw, a sign of falsehood, something to justify his initial skepticism. But there was nothing, only an overwhelming authenticity that disarmed him. He watched her transform the chaotic morning routine into a fun game, with Ha-eun and Ha-rin rushing to brush their teeth, not out of obligation, but for a challenge proposed by Minji. She didn't just prepare meals, she involved them in the process, teaching them the names of vegetables, the importance of each color on the plate. The girls, once quiet and somewhat melancholic children, now radiated a contagious energy. Their eyes, often dull before, sparkled with renewed curiosity. One afternoon, he witnessed a scene that hit him with the force of a punch to the gut. Ha-eun, who had always been the most sensitive, had a nightmare and woke up crying. Jinwoo, from his hiding place, felt the impulse to run to her, but stopped. He wanted to see what Minji would do, and she did what he, in his rigidity and pain, had never been able to do with the same naturalness. She didn't just hug her, she rocked her, sang a soft lullaby, and, with eyes full of seemingly infinite compassion, whispered words of comfort that calmed the girl until she fell back asleep. Minji remained there, sitting on the floor beside the bed, holding Ha-eun's tiny hand until she was sure the child's sleep was deep and peaceful. Jinwoo felt a pang of shame. He was the father, the protector. But it was Minji who was there, filling the void he couldn't. He remembered nights when his daughters cried for their mother, and he, in his own grief, only hugged them awkwardly, not knowing what to say, not knowing how to heal. Minji, with her simplicity and warmth, seemed to hold the key to a world he had lost. The pretense of his business trip became increasingly complex. He sent emails and made calls from his study, simulating important meetings and decisions, while his real world unfolded just a few meters away. His loyal assistant, Secretary Kim, was confused by Jinwoo's lack of direct communication, but obeyed the enigmatic orders. "Maintain the facade. No one must know I'm home." The tension of being a ghost in his own life was exhausting. He ate cold meals in his study, slept on an uncomfortable sofa, and showered in a guest bathroom, always careful not to make noise. The risk of being discovered was constant, and the thought of Minji seeing him there lurking filled him with deep embarrassment. But the need to continue observing was stronger. He needed to understand, he needed to feel, and he did feel. It wasn't just the warmth spreading through his chest, but a complex tapestry of emotions. There was gratitude, yes, for Minji bringing light back to his daughters. There was admiration for her resilience and kindness. But there was also a growing sense of dependence. He realized that it wasn't just his daughters who were becoming attached to Minji. He was, too. Her presence, even if invisible to her, made his house a home again. One evening, as Minji prepared dinner in the kitchen, humming a soft melody, Jin-woo watched her. She had her back to him, her hair tied in a simple ponytail, her posture tired, yet graceful. He noticed the small things, the way she organized the girls' toys before bed, the care with which she watered the living room plants, the good morning note she left for them on the breakfast table. She wasn't just fulfilling a contract. She was investing her heart. It was then that the truth, cold and undeniable, hit Jin-woo. He wasn't just observing a maid. He was observing the woman who, unknowingly, was rebuilding his family, and the idea that she might leave, that this light might be extinguished, terrified him in a way his wife's loss hadn't. The pain of loss was an old wound, but the prospect of losing this new hope was a threat to something he was only just beginning to rediscover. He stepped away from the window, his heart pounding. The observation, which began as a test, had turned into an addiction, but now he knew he could no longer be just a spectator. The tension of his pretense was becoming unbearable, and the need to act, to solidify Minji's presence in their lives, became imperative. Lee Jin-woo, the man who planned empires and moved markets, began to devise a new plan, a plan that involved no mergers or acquisitions, but rather the delicate and dangerous task of permanently integrating Kim Min-ji, the gentle smiling maid, into his life and the lives of his daughters. The question was no longer if she was real, but how he could keep her. And the answer, he knew, would require him to tear down all the barriers he had built around his own heart. The next phase of his unexpected attitude was about to begin, and it would be far riskier than any deal he had ever closed. The decision had been made, but the execution was a labyrinth of uncertainties. Lee Jin-woo, the man accustomed to commanding, now felt like an actor about to go on stage without a complete script. The pretense of his trip needed to end. He sent an email to Secretary Kim with a tone of forced urgency. "I will return earlier. Unexpected matters require my presence." The assistant, accustomed to his boss's sudden changes, merely confirmed without questioning. The car, which he had dismissed on the night of his departure, waited for him at the mansion's entrance, as if he were truly arriving from the airport. Jin-woo stepped out, his suit impeccable, his briefcase in hand, his expression of fatigue calculated, but inside his heart pounded with a mixture of anxiety and a strange excitement. He was coming home, but not as the father who left. He was returning as a spy who somehow had fallen in love with what he was spying on. The door opened before he could ring the bell. It wasn't Minji. It was Ha-yun and Ha-rin running towards him, their faces lit up. "Daddy!" The sound of their voices was a balm, but also a painful reminder of the time he had lost, of the distance he himself had created. He hugged them tightly, smelling the scent of children's soap and something else. A smell of freshly baked cookies, an aroma of home that he no longer associated with his own house. It was then that Minji appeared, coming from the kitchen, an apron tied around her waist, her hands still dusty with flour. She stopped, surprised, her gentle expression turning into a polite smile. "Mr. Lee, What a surprise. We weren't expecting you back so soon. Her voice was calm, professional, but Jinwoo could feel the vibration of her presence, the energy she radiated. He saw her, not as the maid he had hired, but as the woman who had filled the void in his home, in his daughters, and to his own surprise, in his own heart. Yes, Minji-si. Business required an early return, he replied, his voice a little hoarser than usual. He avoided her direct gaze, fearing she might see the knowledge in his eyes, the truth of his secret observations. It was a dangerous game, and he needed to be convincing. The girls, still clinging to him, began to chatter about what they had done. Minji-uni taught us how to make cookies, Daddy, and she read us a story about a dragon who became friends with a princess, Ha-un exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. Ha-rin nodded vigorously. Jinwoo listened to them, but his eyes were fixed on Minji, who smiled at the girls with a tenderness he had seen so many times from his hiding place. That smile, now directed at him, though more restrained, was living proof that he had not been mistaken. "It seems you had a lot of fun," Jinwoo said, trying to maintain a casual tone. "Minji-si, thank you for taking such good care of them." "It's my job, Mr. Lee," she replied, with a slight bow. But there was something more in her gaze, a genuine satisfaction that went beyond duty. She looked tired, but happy. That night, Jinwoo had dinner with his daughters and Minji, the first family meal he had had in weeks. He watched how Minji encouraged the girls to eat their vegetables, how she made them laugh with little stories about the ingredients. It was a dynamic he had never been able to create. He felt like a stranger at his own table, a first-person observer, still unable to fully participate. After the girls went to bed, Jinwoo called Minji to his study. The room, once his sanctuary of observation, now seemed like a stage for a confrontation he himself had orchestrated. Minji entered, her posture erect, her expression curious. "Minji-si, please sit." He indicated the chair opposite him. "I wanted to discuss your job performance." She nodded, professionalism in every fiber. "Yes, Mr. Lee." "During my absence, I noticed a significant change in the house. The girls, they seem happier, more engaged. And the house somehow seems more alive." He chose his words carefully, avoiding any mention of his secret observation. "I attribute this largely to your effort and dedication." A slight blush colored Minji's cheeks. "I'm happy to hear that, Mr. Lee. I just try to create a welcoming environment for the girls." "And you've done an exceptional job," Jinwoo continued, his voice softer. "So exceptional, in fact, that it made me reconsider some things." He paused, his heart pounding. This was the most delicate part. "Minji-si, I would like to offer you a new position." She blinked, surprised. "A new position, Mr. Lee?" "Yes, no longer just as a housekeeper, but as a governess. Your primary focus would be the well-being and development of the girls, overseeing their activities, assisting with their education, and, of course, maintaining the family atmosphere you have so brilliantly established." He leaned slightly forward. "This would come with a considerable salary increase and a long-term contract. I want you to feel part of this family, Minji-si, not just an employee." Silence filled the study. Minji looked at him, her deep brown eyes trying to decipher the intention behind his words. Jinwoo could feel the tension in the air, the weight of his proposal. He wasn't just offering a job, he was offering a place, a connection, and he knew that by doing so, he was exposing himself in a way he never had before. The question was no longer how to keep her, but how would she react to his attempt to keep her, and her answer, he knew, would define the next chapter of their lives. The silence in Jinwoo's study was heavy, almost palpable. Minji looked at him, her deep brown eyes trying to decipher the intention behind his words. Jinwoo's proposal wasn't just a raise or a new title. It was an invitation to a level of intimacy and permanence she had never imagined. "I want you to feel part of this family, Minjisi, not just an employee." The words echoed, laden with a weight he himself barely understood. He had exposed himself, torn down the barriers that protected him, and now he waited. Minji blinked, surprise still evident on her face. "Mr. Lee, I don't know what to say." Her voice was a whisper, her professional composure momentarily shaken. "This is a very generous offer, and I am immensely grateful for your trust." She paused, her gaze drifting to the table, then returning to him with a newfound caution. "But part of this family? What does that mean exactly in practical terms?" Jinwoo felt a chill down his spine. He knew he needed to be convincing, and above all, credible. He couldn't reveal the extent of his observation, the depth of his attachment. "It means stability, Minjisi. For the girls, and for you, it means I don't see this as a temporary position, but as a long-term partnership in the care and development of Hayun and Harin. They have become attached to you in a way they haven't to anyone since. Well, since their mother. And I see the difference you've made. The house has life again. They have joy." He gestured slightly. "I need to ensure that this light doesn't go out, that they have the continuity and emotional support you have provided." He watched Minji's expression, searching for any sign of distrust, any hint that she might see through his carefully constructed facade. She seemed to be processing, weighing each word. The gratitude was still there, but now mixed with a hint of uncertainty. "I understand your concern for the girls, Mr. Lee, and I'm happy to know that my work has been so valued," she replied, her voice regaining some of its usual firmness. "But a position as a governess, it's a much greater commitment. It involves immense responsibility and a closeness that goes beyond a simple employment contract." She hesitated again. "I am a professional, Mr. Lee, and I've always strived to keep boundaries clear. This proposal, it seems to blur those boundaries in a significant way." Her honesty struck him. She wasn't just thinking about money or security. She was thinking about the implications, the unspoken expectations. He admired her integrity, even if it made him more anxious. "And it is precisely because of your integrity that I am making this offer." "Minji Shi," Jinwoo countered, his voice softer, almost pleading. "I am not asking you to become someone else or to abandon your principles. I am asking you to continue being the Minji Shi my daughter's love and who has brought so much peace to this house, with formal and financial recognition that reflects the invaluable worth of your role." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "The boundaries, Minji Shi, are something we can define together, but the essence of what I seek is your presence, your positive influence in my daughter's lives." Silence returned, even denser. Minji lowered her gaze, thoughtful. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the balance of pros and cons she was weighing. The offer was a golden opportunity for someone in her position, but also a potential trap, an invitation to a world that was not her own. For Jin Woo, every second felt like an eternity. He had risked everything, not just his pretense, but the very fabric of his newly rebuilt life. If she refused, what would he do? Return to the emptiness? To the apathetic daughters? The prospect was unbearable. He had become dependent on her in a way he never imagined possible. Lie. Minji raised her head. There was a resolution in her eyes, but also caution. "Mr. Lee, I need some time to think," she said, her voice firm. "This is not a decision I can take lightly. I care deeply for Ha-Yun and Ha-Rin, more than for any other job I've ever had, and your offer it's far more than I could expect." She gave a slight bow. "But I need to understand all the ramifications and be sure that I can meet the expectations of such an important position, and that I can maintain my own integrity." Jinwoo felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief because she hadn't flatly refused. Frustration because the uncertainty persisted. Of course, Minjisi, take all the time you need, but know that my offer is sincere and that my priority is my daughter's well-being. And your role in that is irreplaceable. She nodded, stood up, and bowed more deeply before leaving the study, leaving Jinwoo alone with his thoughts. The door closed softly, but the sound echoed in his mind like an ultimatum. He had played his highest card, and now the fate of his family and his own heart lay in Kim Min-ji's hands. The tension had not diminished. It had merely changed form, transforming into an agonizing weight. He had promised to tear down the barriers of his heart, but now the highest barrier was the uncertainty of her answer. And he knew that for a man accustomed to controlling all outcomes, this was the most difficult ordeal of all. The game, he realized, was just beginning. The silence that followed Minji's departure from the study was more deafening than any noise. Jinwoo remained seated, his hand still extended towards the empty chair, as if her essence still lingered there, hovering in the air. He had played his highest card, revealed a vulnerability he had sworn never to expose again, and now the fate of his family and his own heart lay in Kim Min-ji's hands. The tension had not diminished, it had merely changed form, transforming into an agonizing weight. He had promised to tear down the barriers of his heart, but now the highest barrier was the uncertainty of her answer. And he knew that, for a man accustomed to controlling all outcomes, this was the most difficult ordeal of all. The game, he realized, was just beginning. That night, Jinwoo's sleep was a battlefield. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Minji's face, the surprise, the gratitude, the caution. He tossed and turned, his mind racing in circles, analyzing every word spoken, every nuance in her expression. Had he been too direct, too hasty? He, the calculating businessman, had acted on impulse, guided by a need he barely understood. The need to keep that light, that joy Minji had brought to his home, and to his daughter's lives, and he had to admit, to his own life. Meanwhile, Minji walked through the silent corridors of the mansion, the weight of Jinwoo's proposal on her shoulders. Part of this family. The words echoed, seductive and terrifying. She felt like a tightrope walker, balancing between security and danger. The offer was a dream for anyone in her position. Stability, a life-changing salary, and the opportunity to continue caring for the girls she already loved as her own. But there was an abyss of implications. She sat in the small armchair in her room, looking out at the darkness. That man, Lee Jinwoo, was an enigma. He was the boss, the distant millionaire. But in his eyes, she had glimpsed something more. Something that made her question everything. Did he truly see her only as an exceptional employee? Or was there something more to his invitation to become part of the family? The idea of crossing the professional line frightened her. She had always maintained her boundaries, protecting herself from getting too involved, from getting hurt. But with Ha-yoon and Ha-rin, those boundaries had already been blurred long ago. The next morning, breakfast was a show of forced normality. Jinwoo tried to appear calm, but his eyes furtively sought Minji's. She, in turn, was more reserved than usual, her energy focused on the girls, avoiding his gaze. Ha-eun and Ha-rin, oblivious to the tension in the air, chattered about their dreams and plans for the day. "Minji-ani, are you going to play hide-and-seek with us today?" Ha-eun asked, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, and then we can read that new book," Ha-rin added. Minji smiled at them, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, my little ones, but first you need to finish breakfast." The tenderness in her voice was undeniable, and Jinwoo watched her, a knot tightening in his stomach. This was exactly what he feared losing, that genuine love, that connection that transformed his house into a home. Later, while the girls were at school, Jinwoo tried to work, But his mind refused to cooperate. He found himself looking out the study window, waiting, wondering. Minji's every step through the house seemed to echo in his head. He needed an answer, but knew he couldn't pressure her. Patience for him was a virtue rarely exercised. Minji, meanwhile, dedicated herself to household chores, but her thoughts were far from dust and organization. She found herself in a dilemma. Accepting meant a life of comfort and deepening her bond with the girls, but also the possibility of a broken heart if expectations weren't clear or if the dynamic changed. Refusing meant returning to uncertainty, to temporary jobs, and most painfully, moving away from Ha-un and Ha-rin. She loved them. The idea of not seeing them every day, of not hearing their laughter, was almost unbearable. She remembered Jinwoo's words. "I want you to feel part of this family. Minji-si, not just an employee. And then, the boundaries, Minji-si, are something we can define together." There was a sincerity in his voice that touched her deeply. He wasn't just offering a job. He was offering a place, a safe harbor, something she had never truly had. By the end of the day, the tension in the house was almost palpable. Jinwoo was in his study, waiting. Minji was in the kitchen preparing dinner, but her movements were slower, more hesitant. She knew she couldn't postpone the decision much longer. The silence of the house seemed to demand an answer. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and visualized the girls' smiling faces. It was for them. It had always been for them. But it was also for herself, for that longing for belonging she had suppressed for so long. With newfound determination, Minji dried her hands on her apron and walked towards Jinwoo's study. Every step was an act of courage, a crossing into unknown territory. The game was far from over, but she was about to make her own move. Jinwoo felt her footsteps approaching, and his heart raced. The moment of truth had arrived. The sound of Minji's footsteps echoed in the hallway, each one a beat in Jinwoo's racing heart. He didn't move, didn't breathe deeply. He just waited, motionless, as her shadow stretched under the crack of the door. When she finally stopped, the silence that followed was so dense it seemed to crush the air. She didn't knock, she just waited, and he knew she was there, on the other side, mere inches away, yet also a universe apart. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "Come in, Minji-si." The door creaked softly as it opened, revealing Minji's figure. Her eyes were fixed on his, a mixture of apprehension and newfound resolve. She didn't look like the maid he had hired. She looked like a woman on the verge of a life-changing decision. She entered, closing the door behind her, but didn't sit. She remained standing, a few steps from the desk, as if ready to retreat at any moment. "Mr. Lee," she began, her voice firm but with a slight tremor, "I have thought a great deal about your proposal." She paused, and Jinwoo felt the air catch in his lungs. "It is an offer that I never imagined receiving, and I am grateful, deeply grateful, for the trust you place in me and for the recognition of my work with Ha-yun and Ha-rin." He watched her, trying to decipher the direction of her words. Every fiber of his being was tense. "I love your daughters, Mr. Lee," she continued, and the sincerity in her voice was undeniable, making Jinwoo's heart warm. "They are the reason I consider this proposal so seriously. The idea of not being a part of their lives, of not watching them grow, of not sharing their joys and sorrows. It is something that deeply pains me." A subtle relief began to spread through Jinwoo's chest, but he still didn't dare to breathe. "I accept your offer, Mr. Lee," she finally said, and the words were like a balm to his soul. He felt the weight of days of anxiety dissipate. A slight smile began to form on his lips, but Minji wasn't finished yet. "However," she continued, and Jin Woo's smile froze. I need us to be very clear about what this means. You spoke of defining the boundaries together. I need that to be a real promise. I need clarity, mutual respect, and for my integrity as a person and as a professional to always be maintained. She took a step forward, her posture more confident now. I don't want to be a substitute, Mr. Lee. I want to be the Minji that Ha-Yun and Ha-Rin love, and who can continue to care for them, to guide them, to love them, within a role that is formally recognized, but that also allows me to maintain my own identity and my own values. Jinwoo stood up, surprise and admiration mixed with relief. She wasn't just accepting, she was setting terms, showing a strength and wisdom he had underestimated. Minji-si, he said, his voice now firmer, laden with an emotion he could barely contain. I expected no less from you, and I fully agree. The boundaries will be defined together, with clarity and respect. Your integrity is precisely what made me value you so much. He approached her, extending his hand. Welcome to the family, Minji-si. Not as a substitute, but as yourself. An essential and irreplaceable part of it. Minji hesitated for a moment, her eyes meeting his. There was an intensity in the exchange that went beyond words, a tacit promise of an uncertain but possibility-filled future. She finally shook his hand, her touch soft, yet firm. Thank you, Mr. Lee. The handshake lasted a little longer than necessary, a silent bridge between two worlds that now met. When they released each other, the air in the study seemed to vibrate with a new energy. We'll need to formalize this, of course, Jinwoo said, trying to bring a more professional tone to the conversation, though his heart was still celebrating. A new contract, with clear financial terms and responsibilities, but more importantly, it's your presence and your commitment. Minji nodded. I understand. I'm ready to discuss the details whenever you wish. That night, Lee Jinwoo's house felt lighter, though the tension still lingered, now transformed into anticipation. The girls, upon returning from school, sensed the change, though they couldn't explain it. Minji was a little more smiling, Jinwoo a little less distant. Daddy, why are you smiling so much today? Ha-Eun asked at dinner, observing her father. Jinwoo looked at Minji, who was sitting at the table with them, as part of the family. A genuine smile spread across his face. Because today, my little ones, our family just got a little bigger and much happier. Minji felt a warmth spread through her chest. Jinwoo's words, spoken in front of the girls, were a public acknowledgement, a significant step. But she knew the journey was just beginning. Acceptance was just the first step on a path full of challenges and redefinitions. In the following days, Jinwoo and Minji began the formalization process. Lawyers were involved. Contracts were drafted. But the real work was in the conversations they had, in the attempts to define the indefinable. How do you measure part of the family? How do you set boundaries when the heart has already crossed so many borders? Jinwoo found himself more present, more involved. He watched Minji with the girls, no longer as a spy, but as a father who finally found peace. And Minji, in turn, felt more at ease, more self-possessed, though caution never completely abandoned her. She was in uncharted territory, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. The game, he realized, had changed. It was no longer about discovering the truth, but about building a new reality. And in that reality, hearts were more exposed, feelings deeper, and the risk of getting hurt or falling in love was greater than ever. The barrier of uncertainty had been torn down, but a new and more complex barrier, that of intimacy and unspoken expectations, had risen in its place. The agonizing wait was over, but the real ordeal, that of learning to live and love within these new boundaries, was just beginning. The days that followed Minji's acceptance were a delicate dance between formality and emotion. Jinwoo had instructed his lawyers to draft a new contract, one that went beyond the usual duties of a maid or nanny. He wanted Minji to have security, recognition, and above all, an unquestionable place in his daughters' lives. But how do you write part of the family in legal terms? How do you define love in contractual clauses? The meetings with the lawyers were revealing, not so much for the legal minutiae, but for how they forced Jinwoo to articulate his own feelings and expectations. She's not an employee, but she's also not a wife, he tried to explain to his lawyer, who looked at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. She is the guardian of my daughters, the person who loves them as if they were her own. I want her to have the authority to make important decisions about their education and well-being, as a mother would. Minji, in turn, participated in these discussions with a seriousness that impressed Jinwoo. She didn't ask for luxuries or perks, but for clarity. I need to know what my role is when you are not present, she said in one of the meetings. They need stability, and I need to know that I can protect them, that my decisions will be respected. She insisted on terms that guaranteed her autonomy and her voice, not just as an extension of Jinwoo's will, but as a figure of authority in her own right. With each word, Jinwoo felt a wave of admiration for her strength and intelligence. She wasn't just accepting a position, she was building a future. At home, the atmosphere had subtly changed. The tension of uncertainty had been replaced by a new, sweeter and more complex anticipation. Minji still performed her tasks, but now there was a lightness in her movements, a confidence in her gaze. Jinwoo, in turn, was more present. He no longer hid in his study, observing from afar. Now he joined them for dinner, read stories to the girls before bed, and occasionally found himself in long conversations with Minji after the girls were asleep. They were conversations about the girls, of course, their progress at school, their little dramas, their dreams. But inevitably, the conversations drifted. They talked about life, about losses, about what it meant to build a home. Jinwoo discovered that Minji had a surprisingly profound worldview, shaped by her own difficulties, yet still full of hope. He found himself laughing at her astute observations or pondering her advice. One evening, while discussing the choice of a new school for the girls, Jinwoo found himself confiding about the pressure of being a single father. Sometimes I feel so lost, Minji, he confessed, his voice low. I want the best for them, but I don't know if I'm doing enough, if I'm being the father they deserve. Minji listened patiently, her gentle eyes fixed on him. You are doing your best, Mr. Lee, she said, her voice soft but firm. And the most important thing is that they feel your love. They love you, and you are not alone. We are here. The word "we" resonated in the silence of the study, a tacit promise, an invisible bridge forming between them. Jinwoo felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of relief he hadn't felt in years. The girls, with the innocence and perceptiveness of children, were the first to name the change. Daddy, are Minji and you dating now? Harin asked one day, as the three were at the park, Minji pushing the girls on the swings and Jinwoo watching from a nearby bench. The question, spoken with a child's simplicity, made Jinwoo's heart race and Minji almost miss a beat on the swing. No, Harin, Jinwoo replied, trying to keep his voice calm, but feeling a blush rise to his face. Minji is she's part of our family, she takes care of you. But she's like a mommy, Ha-yun interjected, her eyes sparkling. She gives us goodnight kisses and makes us laugh, and you smile more when she's around. The girl's words were a mirror, reflecting a truth that Jinwoo and Minji were trying, perhaps unconsciously, to ignore. The barrier between the professional and the personal, which they had promised to define, was dissolving, not by their will, but by the force of the affection radiating from them. That night, after the girls were asleep, Minji and Jinwoo met in the kitchen preparing tea. The silence between them was different now, laden with Hayun and Harin's words. The girls. They have very fertile imaginations, Minji said, breaking the silence, her voice a little tense. Jinwoo chuckled softly. They are observant, and children say what they see, don't they? He looked at her, and their eyes met. There was an unspoken question in his gaze, and an unformulated answer in hers. I don't want them to be confused, Mr. Lee, Minji continued, looking away at the teacup in her hands. I want my role to be clear to them and to us. And what is your role, Minji-shi? Jinwoo asked, his voice soft, but with an intensity that made her look up again. Are you the governess, the nanny, the guardian, or something more? The air in the kitchen seemed thin. Minji felt her heart beat faster. She had demanded clarity, but now that clarity was being offered, she felt terrified. She saw him not just as her employer, but as a man who was opening up to her, a man who trusted her with what he held most precious. And, to her own surprise, she felt something for him, something that went beyond professional respect. I am the Minji who loves Haun and Harin, she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. And who wants to see them happy, and who wants to be part of their happiness and yours? The last words hung in the air, an unintentional but undeniable confession. Jinwoo took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His eyes were fixed on hers, a whirlwind of emotions reflected in them. He reached out, and for a moment Minji thought he would touch her. But he only took the teacup from her hand, his fingers brushing hers for an instant. The touch was electric, subtle, yet profound. I want that too, Minji-shi, he said, his voice hoarse. I want you to be part of our happiness and mine. The barrier of uncertainty had been torn down, but a new and more complex barrier, that of intimacy and unspoken expectations, had risen in its place. The agonizing wait was over, but the real ordeal, that of learning to live and love within these new boundaries, was just beginning, and neither of them knew where this journey would lead them. But both felt they were on the verge of something extraordinary. That touch, as brief as a blink, yet as profound as an abyss, resonated in the silence of the night. The teacup, now in Jinwoo's hands, seemed to carry the weight of all the unspoken words, of all the feelings that had been carefully guarded and now threatened to overflow. Minji felt the warmth of the tea dissipate, replaced by a flame igniting in her chest, a mixture of fear and intoxicating hope. That night, sleep did not come easily for either of them. Jinwoo tossed and turned in his bed, the image of Minji's eyes, the vulnerability in her voice, the subtle confession of her feelings, all replaying in his mind. He had sought the truth, had found an undeniable connection, but now he stood before something much greater, something that challenged all his expectations and redefined what he thought was possible. He, the man who had sworn never to love again, who had closed his heart to protect himself and his daughters, felt it beating again, with a force that both frightened and fascinated him. Minji, in her modest room, also struggled with insomnia. Jinwoo's words, "I don't want our family to lose you," were a balm to her soul, but also a source of anxiety. She, a woman of humble origins, was falling in love with a widowed millionaire. The social disparity, the judgments that would come, the complexity of being a mother to girls who already had a mother, even if absent, all of this haunted her. She loved the girls with all her being, and Jinwoo's affection was an unexpected and precious gift. But she knew it wasn't just about their feelings, it was about his reputation, the girls' future, and the delicate web of social expectations. She wondered if she was being selfish by allowing her feelings to grow, by dreaming of something that seemed so impossible. The next morning brought a new layer of tension, a subtle electricity in the air that only they seemed to feel. Glances met and quickly darted away, laden with a new awareness. Conversations were more cautious, but also more charged with meaning. The girls, oblivious to the complexity of adult feelings, continued to be the link, the bridge that united them. "Daddy, is Minji-si taking us to school today?" Hyun asked at breakfast, her eyes sparkling. "She tells the best stories in the car." Jinwoo looked at Minji, who was pouring coffee. "Minji-si has other things to do today, dear. I'll take you." Minji felt a pang of disappointment but nodded professionally. "Yes, Miss Hyun. Mr. Lee has a much cooler car to take you." But Ha-rin, with her childish perceptiveness, interjected, "But weren't you and Daddy talking late last night? We heard your voices in the kitchen." A blush rose to Minji's face, and Jinwoo cleared his throat, trying to hide his own embarrassment. "We were just discussing plans for the week, girls. Adult stuff." The girls exchanged glances, not entirely convinced, but accepted the explanation. However, the incident served to reinforce the uncomfortable truth. They were being watched, and the bubble of denial they tried to maintain was growing thinner. The meetings with the lawyers continued, but now seemed even more surreal. Jinwoo tried to explain to his lawyers what he wanted Minji to be, but legal words failed to capture the essence. "I want her to have the same authority as I do regarding the girls," he insisted, "and to be recognized as a parental figure, not just an employee." The lawyer, an experienced but visibly confused man, finally asked, "Mr. Lee, what you are describing is essentially the role of a mother. Are you considering marriage?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Jinwoo felt a shiver. Marriage. The word was a ghost from his past, a promise he had broken with his wife's death. He looked at Minji, who was sitting beside him, her eyes fixed on the table, but her posture tense. She had heard too. I'm not talking about marriage," Jinwoo replied, his voice a little harsher than intended. "I'm talking about family. About a commitment to my daughter's well-being and to the person who loves them unconditionally." But the seed had been planted. The idea, once unthinkable, now floated between them, a frightening and tempting possibility. That night, the conversation in the kitchen was different. There was no tea, just the heavy silence of the lawyer's question. Minji finally broke the silence. "Mr. Lee, what do you truly want?" Jinwoo looked at her, his eyes deep and full of a vulnerability she had never seen before. "I want what's best for Ha-Eun and Ha-Rin, and what's best for them is you, Minji-si. It's having you around, loving them, caring for them. And to be honest, what's best for me too." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them again. The air was thick with anticipation. I don't know how to name this, Minji-si. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know I don't want you to leave. I don't want our family to lose you." Minji felt her own eyes well up. His frankness, his honesty in his voice, disarmed her completely. "I don't want to go either, Mr. Lee," she whispered, her voice choked. "I love the girls, and I care for you, more than I should." The last words were almost inaudible, a confession that broke the last barrier of caution. Jinwoo reached out again, this time without hesitation. His fingers brushed her cheek, a soft touch, but laden with overwhelming emotion. Minji closed her eyes, leaning into the touch, feeling the electricity spread throughout her body. "Perhaps," Jinwoo said, his voice hoarse, "perhaps we don't need to name it yet. Perhaps we can just feel and see where this leads us." He gently pulled her closer, and Minji did not resist. Their bodies touched, a closeness that was both new and strangely familiar. Minji's heart pounded. and she could feel his pulsing against hers. There was no kiss, no words of love yet, just the tacit promise of an uncertain future, but full of possibilities. The barrier of intimacy had been broken, not by a decision, but by the undeniable force of two hearts that, against all expectations, had found each other. And in that silent embrace, the outside world, with its rules and judgments, seemed to disappear completely. They were on the verge of a new beginning, and fear was transforming into a silent courage to face whatever came. The embrace, more a promise than a consummated gesture, slowly broke. Jinwoo pulled back, but his eyes never left Minji's. The touch on her cheek remained, an invisible ember radiating warmth. The silence of the kitchen now was not heavy, but charged with a new and fragile hope. Both were on the verge of something, a precipice of emotions and uncertainties. I need to think, Jinwoo said, his voice still hoarse, but with renewed clarity. He wasn't asking for permission, but declaring a need to process the turmoil Minji had awakened in his heart, a heart he thought was forever sealed. Minji just nodded, unable to speak. Her own emotions were a tangle of relief, fear, and a forbidden joy. She watched him turn his back and leave the kitchen, leaving her alone with the echo of his words and the persistent warmth of his touch. The night promised to be long, and it was. For Jinwoo, sleep was a denied luxury. He found himself wandering through the house, the silence of dawn amplifying his thoughts. The image of Minji, the confession in her eyes, the vulnerability she had shown, all mingled with the lawyer's question. Are you considering marriage? The word resonated, a warning bell, and at the same time a tempting invitation. He had promised himself he would never marry again, that his daughters would be his sole romantic priority. But Minji had broken that silent promise with her mere existence, with her kindness, with the love she poured over Ha-Yun and Ha-Rin. He found himself imagining a future with her, a future where the emptiness in his home and in his heart would be filled. But the fear of losing again, of failing, of exposing his daughters to more pain, was a monster he struggled to contain. Minji, in her room, also found no refuge in sleep. Jinwoo's words, "I don't want our family to lose you," were a balm to her soul, but also a source of anxiety. She, a woman of humble origins, was falling in love with a widowed millionaire. The social disparity, the judgments that would come, the complexity of being a mother to girls who already had a mother, even if absent, all of this haunted her. She loved the girls with all her being, and Jinwoo's affection was an unexpected and precious gift. But she knew it wasn't just about their feelings. It was about his reputation, the girls' future, and the delicate web of social expectations. She wondered if she was being selfish by allowing her feelings to grow, by dreaming of something that seemed so impossible. The next morning arrived, bringing with it a fog of uncertainty. Breakfast was a ballet of furtive glances and restrained conversations. The girls, with their perceptive innocence, sensed the change in the air. "Daddy, why is Minji so quiet today?" Ha-Rin asked, tilting her head. Jinwoo cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. "She's just thinking, dear. Adult matters." He cast a glance at Minji, who was pouring juice, and their eyes met for a brief instant, laden with a tacit understanding. Minji forced a smile. "Yes, Harina, I'm thinking about what fun things we'll do today." But the truth was, she was thinking about how to navigate that new territory, the line between employee and confidant, and now, something more, had become so thin it barely existed. In the days that followed, Jinwoo's house became a stage of unspoken emotions. Touches lingered longer, gazes were deeper. Jinwoo found excuses to spend more time in the kitchen, to watch Minji as she played with the girls, to simply be in her presence. He saw her not just as the woman who cared for his daughters, but as the woman who was, slowly, healing his own heart. He began to reevaluate his meetings with the lawyers. The idea of guardian or parental figure seemed insufficient. He wanted more. He wanted Minji to have an unshakable place in their lives, a place that could not be questioned or taken away. "Mr. Lee, what exactly do you want Minji Si to be legally?" the lawyer asked again, his patience visibly tested. "We need a legal term, a status." Jinwoo looked out the window where Minji was in the garden laughing with the girls. Her laughter was like music to him. "I want her to be our family," he said, the word sounding stronger and truer than he expected. "I want her to have the same rights, the same responsibilities, the same love that I have for them. I want her to be a mother to them, in every sense but the biological." The lawyer frowned. "Mr. Lee, that is a very significant step. It is in fact what one would expect of a wife. Are you truly considering marriage?" The question, once a ghost, was now a solid presence in the room. Jinwoo felt a shiver. He had avoided the word, but it kept haunting him. He looked at the lawyer, then at the photo of his late wife on his desk. Guilt was a heavy burden. That night, Jinwoo sought out Minji. He found her in the living room, reading a story to the girls, who were already sleepy. He waited until they were in their rooms, and then sat beside her on the sofa. "Minji-si," he began, his voice low, "I've been thinking a lot about what the lawyer said, about what you are to us." Minji felt her heart tighten. She knew where this was going. Fear and hope battled within her. "And what have you concluded, Mr. Lee?" He turned to her, his eyes deep and serious. "I can no longer deny what I feel, Minji-si, nor what the girls feel, nor what is evident to anyone who observes us. You are more than a governess, more than a nanny. You are the soul of this house, the heart of our family." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And I cannot imagine a future without you in it, not as an employee, but as a partner, a companion, someone who builds this future with me." Minji felt tears well up in her eyes. His frankness, his vulnerability, the courage to express what they both felt but feared to name. "Mr. Lee," she whispered, I also don't want to go. I love the girls more than anything, and I love you." The confession, once a whisper, was now a clear and undeniable declaration. Jinwoo reached out and gently held her hand. The touch was firm, warm, an anchor amidst the storm of emotions. "Then, Minji-si," he said, his voice choked, "perhaps it's time we stopped running from the word. Perhaps it's time we considered marriage." The word hung in the air, no longer like a ghost, but like a real possibility, frightening and incredibly tempting. Minji looked at him, her eyes tearful, but with a glimmer of determination. The fear was still there, but the courage to love, to build a new family, seemed greater. The path ahead was uncertain, full of challenges, but for the first time in a long time, they were not alone. The real ordeal was just beginning, but they were ready to face it together. The word, uttered with a gravity that resonated through the silent room, hit Minji like a wave. Marriage. It wasn't a whisper of a distant dream, but a real, tangible proposal, coming from the lips of the man she secretly loved. Her eyes, already moist, widened in a mixture of shock and forbidden joy. Her heart, which was already pounding, now seemed to want to leap from her chest, a frantic drum announcing the impossible. For a long moment, the world seemed to stop. Only the warmth of Jinwoo's hand in hers, an anchor amidst the whirlwind of emotions, prevented her from collapsing. She looked at him, searching in his eyes for confirmation that she wasn't dreaming. that this proposal wasn't a mistake, but a truth. And what she found was a silent determination, a courageous vulnerability that made her feel even more connected to him. "Mr. Lee," she began, her voice almost inaudible, choked by emotion. I don't know what to say." The words seemed stuck in her throat, suffocated by the magnitude of the moment. How could a woman like her, with her humble background, even conceive such a future? The fear, the same fear that had haunted her for weeks, reappeared, stronger now that the fantasy was becoming a possibility. Jinwoo squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to say anything now, Minji-si. Just consider. Consider what we feel, what the girls feel. Consider the future we could build." His voice was calm, but laden with a conviction that Minji couldn't ignore. He wasn't asking for an immediate answer, but an acknowledgement of the path opening before them. She closed her eyes, allowing the tears to flow freely. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a complex mixture of relief, gratitude, and overwhelming terror. It's such a big step, Mr. Lee," she whispered, opening her eyes to look at him again. "There are so many things. The difference between us, what people will say, the girl's future." He nodded, understanding. "I know. I've thought about all of that. I've thought about the difficulties, the judgments. I've thought about my responsibility to Ha-un and Ha-rin. But then I thought about you. I thought about how this house has transformed since you arrived. I thought about how they smile, how they've grown with your love. I thought about how I feel when I'm near you, Minji-si. And I realized that the fear of facing these challenges is less than the fear of losing you." His frankness disarmed her. He wasn't romanticizing the situation, but acknowledging the harsh reality, and yet choosing her. This was what touched her most deeply. He wasn't blind to the obstacles, but he was willing to face them for her, for them. I don't want to go either," she repeated, the words now firmer. "I love the girls as if they were my own, and I love you." The confession, once whispered, was now a declaration of equal weight, a commitment echoing his own. Jinwoo smiled, a small smile, but one that lit up his eyes. It was a smile Minji rarely saw, a smile that seemed to have been stored away for years, and now was offered to her. "Then, Minji-si, perhaps we should try, together." The night wore on, and the conversation extended, not in an explosion of passion, but in a careful and sincere exploration of what this decision would mean. They discussed the daughters, the need to prepare them with care, to ensure they felt safe and loved in any scenario. They talked about society, about the glances and whispers that would inevitably come, about the disparity of their backgrounds. Minji expressed her insecurities, her concern about not fitting into his world, about being a burden. "I am not the woman you would expect," she said, her voice full of painful humility. "I don't have the education, the social position. I am just a maid." Jinwoo held her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "You are the woman I need. Minji-si, the woman my daughters need. Your kindness, your strength, your love. That is worth more than any title or fortune. Do not underestimate your worth. You are the soul of this house, and I do not want to live in a house without a soul." His words were a balm to her wounds, a promise of acceptance she never dared to dream of. Gradually, fear began to give way to a silent courage, fueled by Jinwoo's love and conviction. They weren't just falling in love, they were building an alliance, a pact to face the world together. "We will have to be strong," Jinwoo said, his voice serious. "Very strong. But I promise, I will be by your side every step of the way. We will protect the girls, we will protect ourselves. We will build our own family, in our own way." Minji nodded, feeling a new determination blossom within her. The path would be arduous, she knew, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She had Jin Woo and the love of the girls, and that, she realized, was more than enough to face any storm. They sat there, side by side, their hands still clasped, as dawn began to paint the sky in soft hues. There was no passionate kiss, no grand declarations, just the quietude of two hearts that, after a long and tortuous journey, had finally found their home in each other. The marriage proposal was not just an invitation to a future, but an acknowledgement of a present that had already transformed their lives. The real ordeal was just beginning, but they were ready. Together. The soft light of dawn filtered through the living room curtains, painting the scene of their confession with shades of gold and promise. Jin Woo's and Minji's hands were still clasped, a silent link that spoke more than any words. The exhaustion of the previous night, laden with intense emotions, gave way to a reflective quietness. The outside world still slept, oblivious to the revolution that had occurred within those walls. Minji felt the weight of the word marriage settle upon her, no longer as a cloud of fear, but as a sacred responsibility. She looked at Jin Woo, who watched the sunrise with a serious, almost reverent expression. There was no shouting euphoria, but a deep sense of purpose. They had made a choice, and now the path stretched ahead, uncertain but shared. "We need to tell the girls," Jin Woo said, his voice a hoarse whisper breaking the silence. "They need to be the first to know, and we need to do it together." Minji nodded, her heart tight. The girls' reaction was her biggest concern. They loved her, yes, but the idea of a new mother could be complex for hearts so young and already marked by loss. That morning breakfast was different. The girls, Ha-yun and Ha-rin, felt the charged atmosphere, but not with sadness. There was an anticipation in the air, an energy they couldn't decipher. Jin Woo and Minji sat side by side, their hands discreetly touching under the table. "Girls," Jin Woo began, his voice soft, "Minji C and I have something very important to tell you." The twins' eyes widened. They looked from their father to Minji, curious. Minji took Ha-yun's hand, while Jin Woo held Ha-rin's. "You know how much we love you, don't you?" Minji asked, her voice trembling. "And you know how much I love being here with you, taking care of you." "Yes," they replied in unison, their smiles innocent. Jin Woo continued, his voice gaining firmness. "Well, Minji C and I, we've decided that we want to be a real family, a forever family." He paused, searching for the right words. "I asked Minji C to marry me, to be my wife and your new mommy." The silence that followed was deafening. The girls' small faces twisted in a mixture of surprise and confusion. Minji held her breath, fear tightening her chest. Then Ha-yun, the more expressive one, let out a cry of joy. "Mommy, Minji, really?" Ha-rin, a little more reserved, smiled shyly. "You're going to stay forever?" Tears welled up in Minji's eyes. She knelt, pulling both of them into a tight hug. "Yes, my loves, forever. I love you more than anything." Jin Woo joined the hug, feeling relief wash over his body. The girl's acceptance, so pure and unconditional, was the first and most important victory. That moment of 4 hearts beating as one sealed the promise they had made the night before. But the bubble of happiness was short-lived. The news inevitably began to spread. The first to react was the lawyer, Mr. Kim, who called Jin Woo with a mixture of shock and veiled concern. "Mr. Lee, I didn't expect such a quick decision," he said, his voice tense. "Are you aware of the implications? Of society's reaction, your families, the company boards?" Jin Woo listened patiently. Mr. Kim, I am aware of everything, and my decision is firm. Min-ji will be my wife and the mother of my daughters. Tension rose when the news reached Jinwoo's family. His paternal aunt, the family matriarch, called, her voice icy and full of disapproval. Jinwoo, what are you doing? Marrying the maid? Have you gone mad? Think of the family's reputation, your position in the company. Min-ji, who was in the kitchen preparing lunch, heard fragments of Jinwoo's conversation in the study. The words, even muffled, were like knives. Maid, reputation, gone mad. The pain of humiliation and the feeling of inadequacy returned with full force. She clenched her hands, feeling like an intruder in Jinwoo's world, a burden he was about to carry. When Jinwoo emerged from the study, his face was tense, but his eyes met Min-ji's with unshakable determination. He knew she had heard. He walked to her, took her hands and kissed them softly. Don't listen to them, Min-ji, he said, his voice firm. They don't understand. They don't see what I see, what the girls see. You are the woman I chose, the woman this family needs. And I will not allow anyone, not even my own family, to question that. His words were a shield, a fortress he built around her. But Min-ji knew the battle was just beginning. She saw the pain in Jinwoo's eyes, the exhaustion of fighting against a world that refused to accept their love. Mr. Lee, she whispered, I don't want you to suffer because of me. Perhaps it's too much. He hugged her, holding her tight. Never, it will never be too much. We will do this together, Min-ji. We will show them that true love knows no social barriers or prejudices. We will build our own family in our own way, and it will be stronger than any criticism. That night, Jinwoo made a formal announcement to the company board via email and prepared a discreet press release. He was taking control of the narrative, not allowing gossip or speculation to dictate the tone. The tension was palpable, but his determination was even greater. He was willing to face the whole world for Min-ji and his daughters. The real ordeal was just beginning, and they were ready to face it together. The silence of that morning was deceiving, a calm before the storm that Jinwoo had consciously invoked. He knew his actions would have repercussions, but he underestimated the speed and ferocity with which the outside world would react. The discreet press release, sent the night before, was like a spark in a powder keg. Headlines exploded like bombs. Millionaire Lee Jinwoo marries housemaid. High society scandal, Lee Group heir chooses employee. An affront to tradition, the wedding that shocked Korea. Social media buzzed with comments, divided between morbid curiosity, moralistic condemnation, and a minority of cautious support. Min-ji's image, taken from an old charity event where she briefly appeared alongside the girls, was unearthed and plastered everywhere, her gentle face now under the weight of merciless scrutiny. Min-ji felt the impact like a physical blow. Every word was a dagger, every glance, even if imaginary, a silent judgment. Jinwoo's world, which once seemed a refuge, now became a stage of scrutiny for her. She tried to shield the girls from the deluge of news, keeping them away from television and newspapers. But the atmosphere in the house changed. Phones rang incessantly in Jinwoo's study, and the whispers of the other household staff were almost audible. Mr. Lee, perhaps I should leave for a while, she suggested to Jinwoo, her voice almost inaudible one night as he tried to comfort her. I don't want you and the girls to suffer because of me. I am a burden. Jinwoo held her face, his eyes dark and intense. You are not a burden, Min-ji. You are my choice, our choice. And I will not allow the ignorance and prejudice of others to destroy what we are building. You are the mother of my daughters, the woman I love. And that is all that matters. But reality was more complex. Jinwoo's aunt, Mrs. Park, personified the fury of tradition. Her visit was a hurricane of disapproval, a gale of sharp words that cut through the living room air. "Jin Woo, you are shaming our family, marrying a maid. What will the shareholders say? And the girls? How will they grow up with a mother who has no background, no formal education?" Her voice was a whip, and every word seemed aimed at Minji, who was in the kitchen, but heard everything, motionless, her heart aching. Jin Woo, however, was a rock. His determination did not waver. "Aunt, Minji is a woman of impeccable character, of a kindness you would never understand. She is the mother my daughters need, the woman I chose. My personal life is not the board's business, and the family's reputation will be built on the truth of our love, not on empty gossip." "Love?" Mrs. Park scoffed. "That's a fantasy, Jinwoo. You're being naive. She's only interested in your money, your position." At that moment, Minji couldn't take it anymore. She entered the room, her eyes tearful, but with a new spark of dignity. "Mrs. Park, I understand your concerns, but I never asked Mr. Lee for anything. I love the girls with all my heart, and I love Mr. Lee for who he is, not for what he possesses. If my love is a problem, then I am willing to leave, so that the Lee family is not shamed." Jinwoo stood up abruptly, his voice grave and firm. "Minji Si is not going anywhere, and you, Aunt, have no right to question her integrity or my choice. If you cannot support us, then I ask you to leave." Mrs. Park, shocked by her nephew's firmness, cast a final disdainful glance at Minji and left, promising more trouble. The girls, in their innocence, began to feel the change in the air, small questions, curious glances. "Daddy, why was Grandma Park angry?" "Mummy Minji, why are people talking about you on TV?" Minji and Jinwoo tried to answer calmly, explaining that some people didn't understand their love, but that didn't change anything. In her darkest moments, Minji doubted. "Am I destroying his life? Am I strong enough to endure all this?" But Jinwoo was always there, his hand firm in hers, his eyes promising a future they would build together, brick by brick, against all odds. Their first public appearance together was a trial by fire. Jinwoo had been invited to a company gala event, and he insisted that Minji go by his side. She was terrified. The elegant dress he chose for her seemed like a disguise, and she felt exposed, vulnerable. But when they stepped out of the car, hand in hand, and faced the wall of flashes and the curious, judgmental stares, something changed. Jinwoo squeezed her hand, and Minji felt a silent strength emanate from him. She raised her head, her eyes meeting his in a silent pact. They weren't just presenting themselves, they were making a statement. Every camera flash, every whisper, every disapproving glance was a challenge, but they walked together with dignity. Jinwoo smiled at her, a smile only she knew, full of affection and pride. And in that moment, Minji realized that the armor she needed was not indifference, but love. The road ahead was long and uncertain, paved with judgments and prejudices. The battle for acceptance was just beginning, and they knew there would be more wounds, more tears. But that night, under the protective cloak of the home they were building, Minji and Jinwoo knew they were not alone. They were two hearts, one family against the world, and that, in itself, was a victory. The silence that followed Jinwoo's declaration at the press conference was more deafening than any shout. It was the sound of the world digesting an inconvenient truth, one that challenged its expectations and prejudices. The next day's headlines were a whirlwind. CEO Lee defies elite, love or madness. The maid marries the millionaire, a modern fairy tale, or the end of the Lee dynasty. Public opinion was divided, but the polarization was undeniable. For every voice of support, there was a legion of critics, echoing Mrs. Park's words, questioning morality, background, decency. Minji felt the weight of every word, every glance. Even protected in Jinwoo's arms, the storm seemed to invade every corner of the house. The girls, once curious, now brought more loaded questions from school. "Mommy Minji, my classmate said you're not a princess, but a wicked witch who stole Daddy." Minji's heart broke a little more each time. She looked at herself in the mirror, searching for the witch. The opportunist the world insisted on painting, but Jinwoo was always there, a beacon in the fog. "Our strength doesn't come from what others think. Minji, see, it comes from what we know to be true in our hearts." Mrs. Park, as expected, did not give up. Her fury, once contained, exploded into a calculated campaign to destabilize Jinwoo. She convened secret meetings with minority shareholders, spread rumors about Jinwoo's ability to lead the company under undue influence, and even subtly tried to distance the girls from Minji, suggesting that true family needed to protect them, but her every move seemed only to strengthen Jinwoo's resolve. He reorganized the board, consolidating his power, and in a risky move, announced a new corporate social responsibility initiative, focused on inclusion and support for unconventional families, a move that, though risky, resonated with a part of society and reinforced his image as a visionary and modern leader. The hardest battle, however, was internal. Minji struggled with guilt and the feeling that she was dragging Jinwoo into an abyss of problems. "Mr. Lee," she whispered one night as he held her, "I see the tiredness in your eyes. I see how much you are fighting. Perhaps I am not worthy of all this sacrifice." Jinwoo gently pulled her away, his eyes piercing. "Sacrifice? Minji, having you and the girls is the greatest blessing of my life. You are not a sacrifice, you are my reward. And the only thing that tires me is having to explain the obvious to people who refuse to see love." He kissed her forehead. "You are the mother my daughters chose, the woman I love. There is nothing more worthy than that." Those words, repeated tirelessly, began to penetrate Minji's armor of doubt. She watched Jinwoo, his unwavering determination, and saw the reflection of a strength she herself was beginning to discover. She was no longer the frightened maid. She was the woman Jinwoo had chosen, the mother the girls loved, and for them she would fight. Jinwoo's decision to marry Minji was not just a declaration of love, but a redefinition of his own identity and the legacy of the Lee family. He would no longer be the widowed millionaire trapped by conventions, but the man who chose love and happiness above all else. The wedding was simple but deeply meaningful. It was not a grand event for the elite, but an intimate ceremony in the garden of their home, with the girls as bridesmaids, dressed in small white dresses, their smiles radiant. Only the closest friends and a few family members who finally accepted the union were present. Mrs. Park did not attend, but her absence only underscored the strength of the union that was forming. When Jinwoo saw Minji walking towards him, in a simple but elegant dress, his eyes moist with emotion, he knew he had made the right choice. She was not a fairy tale princess, but a queen of her own realm, built on resilience, affection, and truth. The girls, holding Minji's hands, were the perfect image of the family they had forged. Jinwoo's vows were an echo of their journey. "Minji, I chose you not for convenience, not for status, but for the purity of your heart, for the joy you brought into my life and into my daughters' lives. You taught me the true meaning of family, of unconditional love. I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you against all adversity for all the days of my life." Minji, her voice choked, replied, "Mr. Lee, I never imagined I would find such great love, such a precious family. You gave me the courage to be myself, to embrace happiness. I promise to be by your side, as your wife and as the mother of our daughters, with all my heart." The kiss that followed was more than a marriage seal. It was a declaration of victory, the victory of love over prejudice, of family over convention, of happiness over status. The road ahead would still be challenging. The criticism would not disappear overnight, but now they had each other and the unwavering love of their daughters. That night, as the stars shone over the house that was now truly a home, Jinwoo and Minji embraced the girls who slept peacefully between them. The outside world could continue to judge, to whisper, but within those walls, they had found their peace. They were a family, forged in adversity, united by love. And that, in itself, was their most beautiful and enduring story. The story of how a widowed millionaire, returning from a feigned trip, discovered that the true treasure of his life was not in his fortune, but in the heart of a woman and the love she shared with his daughters. And his attitude, unexpected by many, was to embrace that love, building a future where happiness was the only currency of value.